What's up, guys? My name is Alexis Brown, your host with Praises in the Pod, and I am so excited to have Chloe and Shaun with us today. They are newly married and some of my besties, so we are going to start out in prayer, and then we're going to jump right in. Lord, Heavenly Father, thank you for today. Thank you for all your many blessings, dear God. Thank you for Shaun and Chloe. Thank you for sending me them and having their friendship as something that I can count on, that I aspire to be a friend like to others, Lord. I just pray that you speak to us and through us and let this podcast glorify you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Let's get it. All right, Shaun. So if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your childhood and just growing up and stuff.
Yeah, so I'm Shaun Gaskin. I'm the high school director at our church, Southside. And, I'm the youngest of my family, so it's my parents, and I have two siblings, two older sisters. So we moved to Georgia in 2005, so I was 3 years old, and we got plugged into Southside. So my childhood definitely laid the foundation of my faith now, and even in my teenage years. So I was saved at a young age, like 4 or 5, when I remember, like, saying the prayer with my dad and even getting baptized at Southside. But so all this, like, head knowledge, the stuff I knew about God, would eventually come into play when I truly, gave my life over to Christ and rededicated my life to Christ.
You know what? I actually got a text from somebody today, and they were like, if you ever need a topic to talk about, would be like knowing Christ and having an intimate relationship with him.
Yeah.
And when you just said that, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's literally what she was talking about. Like, you can know the Bible, you can know all this stuff, like, about what you've learned and whatever, but until you have an intimate relationship, like, you really don't know, you know?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, like, I think, the best way is like knowing about God versus knowing God,
Yes.
So like you can know a lot about an athlete that has no idea who you are
Yep.
or a celebrity, but knowing God is what really, knowing about God's never going to change you. But when you come in contact with God, that's when you're transformed. So
that's good. Yes. Chloe, tell us about you, girl.
So I'm Chloe Gaskin now. We just got married as of today, I guess, like 2.5 weeks ago.
2.5 weeks, yeah.
I grew up in a great home, not necessarily like a Christ-centered home. Church wasn't like a super important thing for us, but that did make it a bad home. My grandma took me to a Presbyterian church when I was younger. I really saw it as more as like a social thing. Just kind of went to hang out with my friends, and I wasn't really learning about Jesus through the whole experience. But when I got to middle school, a lot of my friends were a part of FCA, which is Fellowship of Christian Athletes. At this point, I still saw my faith as kind of like a social thing. So I went because, my friends were going, but I was intrigued. And so I started becoming more and more involved with that. And then I went to an FCA event called Fields of Faith, and I actually got saved there. But I didn't really know, like, the decision that I had made. I knew that there was, like, a change in me, but I didn't necessarily know, like, what do I do now kind of thing. I knew I needed to stay involved in FCA, surround myself with godly people, and find a church.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I feel like that's a very common thing, though. It's like you get saved, and it's like, I'm saved, now what?
Right.
But at least you knew, even at a young age, like, I need to continue to come to church. I need to continue to be involved, like, all that. So that's awesome. So how exactly, I know that you got connected when you were younger.
Right.
And Chloe, like, how did you get to Southside?
So, I actually got connected to Southside through one of my friends. Her name's Erin. And one night, like, I spent the night at her house, and you know the drill. Like, if you spend a night on Saturday night, like, you've got to go to church with us Sunday.
Yep.
And of course, like, I knew that. Like, I was fine. And she talked very highly of her church. So I was like, sounds awesome. Like, let's go. And I was also really longing for, like, a church that I could go to. So yeah, she brought me to Southside. And I really loved the service. I remember Jim Gray spoke. I remember seeing, like, so many friends from school. Like I said, like, it was still, like, a social thing at this point. But it was awesome because it was the community that I was needing at the time.
Yeah.
And then Aaron's parents asked if I wanted to go back that night for small groups. And, like, the answer was just, like, so clear. I was like, yes. Like, it was
Absolutely.
so fun. It was so fun. And we get to eat. Yes.
Period.
I would like to go. So from then on, I really started getting involved in Ignition, so that's how I really got plugged in.
Well, like, when I think of it, I made this comment right after Ignition Camp last year, which I've talked about on the podcast of, like, where that changed my life completely. Like, I met you guys, you know, like, I just got plugged in.
Right.
And when I came to Ignition, if I knew that, like, middle school ministry was like this when I was in school, I would have loved it.
Right.
But I never even gave it a chance. Like it's whole different environment. Like it's so awesome for the young, the young kids and students and everything. Like it's amazing. So once you really find that and you get that groove, like it's nice.
And it's amazing. Like, I mean, a middle school camp changed your life.
Yes.
And, I mean, you're 29.
Yeah.
Maybe we should edit that out.
And I'll add on that because you talked about community, and that was something kept me there was the people I found. So I kind of hinted at this at the beginning, but I was saved at a young age. I was saved at like 4 or 5. And then early middle school is when I really rededicated my life. For me, in middle school was when I really started to see the difference of this person's living for Christ and this person's not. And so that was when I found faith of my own. I went through a lot, like early middle school. I had an unexpected death in my family and just a ton of anxiety and a bunch of stuff. I won't go into all that, but I don't know if I would say the most attacked I've ever been, but that's the
at that
most
point
I've
in
ever
your
felt
life.
it. Correct. And I didn't even know how to respond. Now when I'm attacked spiritually, I've been in the war, if you will, if you want to use that metaphor for, years. But at that point, I didn't even know how to respond. So halfway through high school, I had finished sophomore year, and up to that point, Josh Ray had led Glide, which was Southside's high school ministry, and I'd been plugged in. And now it was going to be led by Robbie Coleman and Tucker Hall. And that was really, they brought like a group of us in, and they were like, we want you guys to be the student or like the servant leadership team, which we still have a student leadership team. So shout out to them. But Chloe became part of that team, and I was on that team. And November 4th, 2018, we had one of our meetings, and they said they needed people to greet. So I was kind of voluntold to greet that night. And Chloe volunteers to do that. So I don't think anything about it. All right.
Because I wanted him.
So anyway, so we're both greeting, and we talked some. I definitely felt like there was like, I would say a good chemistry, not in a romantic way, but like, I was like, oh, she's really cool. I felt like, I was like, she don't have me on Snapchat tonight.
And
did. And then the next 6 months, so we met in November, we started dating at the end of April. But those 6 months, obviously I think she would have preferred I take the hint a little sooner. But she was like such a good friend. I'm not sure I've ever had a better friend than that. And I think that really laid the foundation for our relationship.
I was thinking about this more recently too. Like, this is completely not impromptu or anything, but you were talking about like how your family moved here, y'all got involved at Southside and all this. And just to think how like you got so involved, like now you work there. Yeah. Your dad works there. Like all this stuff, you met your wife there. Like
in the ministry I lead.
In the ministry you lead. And like I think back about that because like I had a friend invite me in 7th grade to come visit Southside for the first time. And I came, I loved it, whatever. I go home and I tell my mom, I'm like, you need to come check this church out because we were going to another church in town and it like we were there, but I didn't feel a part of, like I didn't feel like plugged in, and you do need to shop around because you need to find where you fit in. And so like when we came, like we instantly became members, like I got baptized there, like all this stuff. And like to look like me and my mom both work there now. Yeah. Like what if I would have never went somewhere else? Like it's just so crazy how God really just like, he's so meticulous. Is that the right word? Like he plants you in those spots and stuff.
Well, I'd say a few things. One, I think both of you guys' stories shows the power of it. All three of our stories shows the power of an invite.
Yes.
A lot of times it's like, they're not going to say yes even if I do invite them to church. Or, they're just going to come to church and hear one message. It's not going to really change. But the power of invite is huge.
Y'all started dating pretty young, and like how did that influence y'all's relationship? How did y'all keep God at the center of that? Because at a young age, like I'm sure that is hard to navigate and everything else. So like what did y'all do? Like what was y'all's keep ways?
So like literally the day that I was like, I felt like something was kind of brewing between us. I was like, like I feel like he likes me, I don't know. And so I asked him, I was like, what are we, what's going on? And
over Snapchat.
Over Snapchat.
We were 15 and 16, so that was the preferred means
what
of
are
communication.
we?
Yes. And like he was just like, well, I like you. And I was like, well, I like you. Like I've been liked you. But I remember that night, like, I'm kicking, giggling, like, hey, he likes me. One of our first conversations, Shaun was like, okay, so like what are some guardrails like we should put up? And I was like, huh? What do you mean? Like we're just a thing. We're talking, And I didn't realize at the time, but it was just like specific things to set up so you don't go too far in a relationship. And so we set those up literally that night. We weren't even like official yet, but like we knew that we would be together more, maybe alone sometimes, like, but we set those up that night early in our relationship. So
yeah, and I mean, that's not to say we were perfect at them. I think we're going to go into that some, but like a lot of this, it's easy for us to say, especially now that you're married. But yeah, your guardrails, we'll go into that, but that's crucial. But honestly, I mean, God was huge in our relationship. Again, one of the biggest things that our faith did was it drove us to wait. We weren't perfect. Like there were times we did things that probably weren't the wisest, or we would go home or whatever, and we'd be like, well, we probably shouldn't have done that tonight. You know what I mean? We did mess up some, but there was always that drive of like, we're not going to have sex until we get married. Like she said, guardrails are huge. I mean, if you're, I don't know, there's this, everybody talks about waiting in the church. Wait for marriage, wait for marriage, wait for marriage. But nobody wants to talk about the details. Mm-hmm. And it's like, especially working in student ministry, I have a passion for this because it's like, if you're not talking with your students about this, they're talking to somebody about it. Mm. They're talking to TikTok about it, or they're talking to the guy in the locker room about it. So they're getting their sex knowledge from somewhere. I know it's kind of like awkward to say that, but they're finding out their ideology and their perspective on sex from somewhere. And I think we're going to go into that some more, but guardrails are huge.
And I mean, like, too far isn't necessarily like having sex. I mean, like there's there's so many things that like that are considered too far and not pleasing to God before marriage. Yeah. So
I thought about like New Year's resolutions, and it's really similar to that. It's very easy to make. It's very easy to uphold for maybe a month or 2 months, or everybody's different. Maybe a week. There's a myth in our culture that's like, oh, I want to try this person out. Mm-hmm. I want to test drive. That's like a common theme. Or I have to have sex with this person before I get married because what if we're not compatible? And sex is huge. Sex is not a bad thing. A lot of times people are like, oh, let's, avoid that. God made sex, but he made it for specific, the confines of a marriage between a man and a woman. So I can't understate sex is huge, but at the same time, that's not everything. So for you to say I have to test drive this girl or I have to test drive with this guy before I get married, I don't need a test drive because I'm not making my vows to her, what she can do for my body.
Yeah.
It goes a lot deeper than that.
Yeah. And I think for me, like, I think a lot of girls would kind of respond to this as like, he's not, as like, y'all aren't physical. Like, how do you know he loves you? And I'm a physical touch person. That's how you can show me love. It also showed me like how much respect he has for me, because I think even at one point, like I maybe asked him, like, oh, like, why don't you touch my butt? Or like, whatever. Yeah. But he's like, that's not mine to touch.
Being young, never been in a relationship, I didn't know. So like there was a period where I did touch her butt and I would be convicted and I would ask like my mentors, like, well, is this okay? And they'd be like, no, so I was not perfect about that. But that was something that, eventually I came to the point where I was like, this is not mine. You shouldn't give, especially ladies. I mean, this goes both ways, but especially ladies, you don't give a boyfriend something you give a husband. That's not the same thing.
Yeah, right.
There's not a vow. There's not a commitment. Sure, your boyfriend's committed to you, but he doesn't deserve a husband benefit. But I also want to say on that similar thought that if you are watching this and you have gone too far, like she said earlier, I mean, it sounds blunt, but you can do a lot of sin with your pants on. So I'm not saying you've had sex, but if you have, or if you've done any sin, there is redemption. Yes. There is forgiveness. So like I said, there were moments where, we did stuff that probably wasn't the wisest. But by the grace of God, I mean, it's ironic because every time we would remind each other that God forgave us, And that's not to be abused. Like, that's not where you're like, oh, I'll go however far I want with my girl because God will forgive me. No, like there's guardrails and there's wisdom because your sin has consequences.
Yes.
God will forgive you of your sin, but you're still going to have consequences. Don't think this is like, wait. And if you haven't waited, it's over for you. Like, no, your story is still, like, God's still in your story.
Right.
Yes. You're doomed. No, I'm just kidding.
And, and if you read Matthew 28, it's the end of Matthew 28, and Jesus, if you're in church, you probably heard this verse, like, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. If you keep reading, he talks about he's humble and gentle at heart. And there's a book, it's called Gentle and Lowly, and I've been reading it, but it's all about how, like, God's innermost being, the entire heart of God, is approachable and gentle and gracious. So if you have messed up, like I said, that can be a myriad of things. Like, it's not just having sex. It can be ton of anything that's sexual besides a husband and a wife, within the confines of marriage. Anything else you can be forgiven for.
So I know y'all have only been married about 2.5 weeks, but that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have y'all on here, is just because it's fresh and, you know, like y'all just are starting this new journey together, you know. So what are some of the lessons, or maybe like what are some of the lessons, or like what's changed about life, you know, kind of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we bought our house in late August, and I moved in. So that was about 2 months ago. And so it would be like every night Chloe would be hanging out, and then it's like, all right, I got to go, you know. So that's been an awesome part, is that she just gets to stay and not go home. But there's been a lot of lessons and blessings, you know, good, like great blessings, but also things to learn. I think one of the coolest things is that it's not just being around her I see a different side, but I see her being in the wife role, I see a different side of her, you know. So I see a lot of qualities and like honestly beautiful aspects of Chloe that are brought out now in the wife role. And I think she's going to talk some about that. But also, as far as a lesson, I think it goes back to your vows, you know. And I think if you're dating and you're considering marriage, or if you're engaged even more so, you need to realize how important a vow is. It is a promise before God and all your family and friends and, I mean, your spouse, that you're going to be with that person and serve them for the rest of your life. So as a husband, especially a husband that I want to be a biblical husband. My goal, my job, not just my goal, my job is to serve and lead and protect and love Chloe. So it's not about even little things. So it's not about like what makes me the most comfortable in my house. It's not always about what I want. It's not about if there's, you know, if it's me being fulfilled or her being fulfilled, I should be wanting her to be fulfilled. And it goes both ways. That's how, when you serve each other, that's a godly marriage.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, I think for me, like, since getting married, like, I've really found my love for serving. Not just Shaun, but like I truly like love to host people. I love to serve people. And before I got married, I could not cook a thing, y'all. I got 2nd-degree burns on my hand one time because
True.
I made like fried Oreos, and I didn't know you couldn't mix hot oil and water. Explosion happened. I had to go to the burn
Like
center.
a mummy hand. She had like a mummy hand for months.
It was crazy. Now I truly like look forward to cooking my meal for us every night.
Me too.
Like I'm sure he does. And but like I truly like that's probably the highlight of my day. Like I get to come home to Shaun and I get to cook and be in like my domain in my kitchen. And my personality is an entertainer, and like my love language is gifts, like gift giving. And so it totally checks out. But I've just really noticed that since getting married, like that's really blossomed.
That's awesome.
So,
and you know, like when I think about it, it's something that you've always dreamed of, right? Like,
yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have y'all on, because I'm going to be quite frank here. Y'all are the only people that I've known and I've met and I've actually become friends with, and in my immediate circle that have waited to marriage, right? And so, and it's just so aspiring. I can't even explain it.
Yeah, there's like there's an innocence
it's
to it.
just so innocent and pure.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say, is like, and it's just, I just really wanted to get on here and allow people to see that it is possible, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not impossible. Yes, we live in a world that, you know, pushes you to test drive and you can explore your sexuality and do all this stuff, and that doesn't define you. But like really it's possible to wait until marriage, to get engaged, to, you know, still push through, and it's just awesome. It's just like waking up. I mean, you wake up or working out or going on a diet and stuff. Like you have to choose
that's right,
to do
exactly.
that every single day. Like you can't just be like, oh, well, I'm done. Like whatever. Yeah. Like you have to choose that. It has to be disciplined, you know?
And if you do fall, I would say this, if you do fall, say like, you know, a couple that's, you know, if you're a couple and you're trying to get to your marriage, you know, your wedding night pure or whatever, if you do fall, you know, if you go too far one night or whatever, don't think that like, well, it's over now, I might as well do anything. You know, like you get right back up and you keep running. I wish I should have brought my Bible. Proverbs, you know, the righteous man falls, but he gets up. I'm paraphrasing, but he gets up every time, you know. So don't think one mistake is the end of the book, you know.
I agree. Right. One of the things that I was just thinking of earlier, you mentioned something like, I wish I could, you know, tell you and emphasize like how important it is. And it's just like our parents, right? They tell us all this stuff that's going to be so beneficial 100%. To us. And we're like, that lady don't know nothing. You know, that man's just crazy. Like, oh, they're just older, like all this stuff. But really, just like if you took some of the things that they try to tell you when you were younger and now you realize, like, man, I should have listened to them. Man, they were so right about things, like whatever. It's the same exact thing with this.
But you talked about it too. I mean, you talked about how much our culture pushes that. And there are extremes, like look around, like if you look around, you're going to find extreme sexual agendas. But at the same time, be really careful what you listen to and what you watch and stuff like that. I know, again, that's something you hear all the time, if this is included, but it's not just like nudity in a movie or something. I would suggest don't watch that because you're filling your mind with it, especially as a guy. We're visual. But it's little things like be careful when you're scrolling and the girl's twerking, or like there's a girl in the swimsuit or something. Like, be careful of that because that's going to be put in your mind. And if you're not careful, that's going to snowball.
Yeah.
You know, and it may be hours later. You may not even think about it because you're busy at work or whatever. When you get home and you're alone, be careful. So just be careful what you're putting in your mind because that's going to go to your heart, you know?
Yeah. I mean, the whole snowball effect in anything in life, you know, sin starts small.
Yeah.
And it just continues to get bigger. Okay, you watched that video one time. Now you liked it. And we know that the algorithm of social medias follows what you like, and it's going to show it more and more. So you allow that one video, you like it, and now you're seeing it all the time. Then that could snowball into straight up watching porn now.
Yeah.
You know, and even Kayla's episode last week or the week before, she talked about how she started watching porn when she was in 3rd grade.
Yeah.
And how it had all these effects on her life from that moment. And even though like you're in the middle of that and you don't see what the greater outcome is, like it does affect you down the road.
I mean, and if you're not careful, like, because I think a lot of times it could be as extreme as porn, or it could just be as like lusting after somebody on social media or something. And it's like, oh, well, I'll never get caught. You know, I'm just looking at somebody's profile. Like there's no way somebody can like incriminate me on that, you know, even if they found what I was doing. You may not, you know, the act may get caught, may not get caught, but the results will.
Yeah.
You know, like that's going to change how you see women. That's going to change the way you carry yourself. That's going to change your future relationships. So, you know, there's no such thing as like something you do that doesn't have any effect. You know, that's not such thing.
Y'all have experience in this. So what is some encouragement, some advice? Like, how would you advise someone to wait for marriage?
So to any Christians, like, you can take my advice with a grain of salt, but also don't. When you get engaged or when you're planning to get engaged, everyone's like, oh, like, do a short engagement. Like, everyone's going to tell you that. And just the little thing, like getting engaged, makes it that much harder. Y'all, have a short engagement. I cannot stress that enough. Like, please do it. Like, it will benefit you so much in the long run. And ladies, it is very possible, more than possible, to plan a wedding in 6 months. I planned mine probably more like 4 months. Yeah. And it was fine. It is just so much better in the long run to do a short engagement, just because that little step of getting engaged affected our thoughts so much. Yeah. Like, because in the Christian culture, like, it's like, okay, like, you're going to get married, like, you're going to have sex on your wedding night. Like, that's the big thing. And so it's like all this pressure, and like, you know, you have to wait, but it's like, oh, like, we're engaged now, like, we're going to be married. We might as well, you know, do this. And no, like, you can't mess around with those guardrails. Like, you can't even come close to them sometimes. Like, it's just, it becomes that much harder.
I am sure that's very difficult. Like, once y'all been together so long, you're engaged now, and now it's like, I mean, we're about to get married. Yeah. You know, like, the closer as it comes. And then, you know, you have, you know, Satan that's trying to push you to go ahead and sin that and go that far and everything else. So you're like, well, we might as well. You know, we're already married. We're basically, like, what are we going to do? Just sign a paper? We're already vowing to one another. Right. You know, and I think that's probably very hard to navigate in that time. So, And, you know, when you're talking about that, I thought about the scripture, 1 Corinthians 7:9. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. And, like, the longer engagement, you're just going to burn and burn and burn, you know, like, for passion. And it's going to get harder and harder. Like, go ahead and get married. If you already know you are, like, why continue to wait and push it off?
Yeah, and I think that's the purpose in dating. Like, if you're not going after marriage, like, then like, what's it for? You
Yeah.
know, like,
Yeah.
and I think also it's worth mentioning, like, Shaun will get into this more, but find an accountability partner. I wish we had done this way before we did it. Even when we were dating, we got an accountability partner when we were engaged, about to be married. But I would highly, highly recommend doing it way before that. Honestly, we could have benefited from it, like, from the very start. I mean,
absolutely.
And just having that, though, it just made it a lot easier, but it also made it a lot harder to sin, or go too far. And ours was amazing. Our accountability partner was amazing, and Shaun will get more into that.
Yeah.
But
An accountability partner is not somebody that you go to every time you sin. Okay, Daniel Hill was our accountability partner.
Which is Kayla's husband.
By the way, talking about short engagements, what they have, 1 day, 2 days?
like 3 days
Yeah,
or something.
48 hours.
That's right. No, but so Daniel was my small group leader. In a lot of ways, he changed my life. Obviously, it was God, but Daniel really changed my life in a lot of ways in high school. So he was my accountability partner. It's not enough for me just to have somebody that's like, every time we mess up, I go tell Daniel. That's not an accountability partner. I guess it is in some sorts, but that's, in my opinion, that's not effective.
No.
You need somebody that's going to be proactive and mature enough and prepared enough to come to you. So, like, I'm not even kidding. Every night.
Every night.
Yeah, every single night. Daniel would text us, how'd you and Chloe do?
And if not, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I didn't text you last night. It would literally be the next morning.
So that twofold. One, it was helpful because I could be honest about the times where we messed up. We're good, man, or probably did something we shouldn't, you know?
Yeah.
But also, I mean, I started this. Accountability is only as successful as you are honest. So, again, let's go back to that example I had. I could have just, you know, when Daniel says, how have you and Chloe been? Been good. You know, been good, doing well, whatever. But I knew this accountability, it's not going to work unless I'm willing to be honest.
Yep.
And I go back to what I said earlier. What is there to lose? My reputation? I mean, what is my reputation worth? You know, it goes back to pride and insecurity. Like, it's not, like, I would rather be honest with somebody and be fully known and fully loved than put up a front just to withhold some, like, way I'm seen, you know?
Yeah.
And I think the cool thing about that relationship is, like, he was our accountability partner, but he also kind of grew into, like, giving Shaun advice. And, like, he even texted Shaun before, all right, like, today's the day. Like, he just encouragement of, oh, my gosh, like, you've come this far. And it was just awesome because he grew from, like, holding us accountable to, like, isn't it amazing that, like, now you're here. And
enjoy it.
Yeah,
like,
enjoy
it.
Yeah.
Here it is.
And I would say look for, you know, we talk about go find an accountability partner. Be an accountability partner for somebody. James 5:16, therefore confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. So
that's what I was thinking of. Not the truth will set you free.
Same
thing, though.
True,
but
I mean, and so you got to bring people into your fight. You know, if you're willing to fight in the dark, you know, you're wrestling with your sin on your own. You're not going to get much victory, if any. You got to bring people into it.
That's good.
Yeah, I want to talk about some guardrails. So this idea of guardrail, if you're not familiar with it, it seems like, what's a guardrail? Like you talked about, you know, when that word's used, it's like, what's a guardrail? Well, if you're driving like up or down a mountain on that road, you'll see these guardrails that are placed. On our honeymoon, we were on a road and there was no guardrail and a steep drop off. And I was like, that's my message on guardrail. But there's these guardrails as you're driving along, obviously to keep you from going off the cliff. But these guardrails aren't right on the edge. You know, like they're not by the cliff, because if they were and you hit them, you're going over the cliff. They're always, you know, 3 feet, maybe 4 feet from the edge, so that if you hit that guardrail and you reach that, whatever you call it, the buffer zone, maybe, you're not going over. So if you put that in your spiritual life, if the cliff is, you know, not waiting, having sex before you're married or watching porn or whatever sin it is that you're trying to set up guardrails for, they can't be right on the line. We're not going to be naked around each other. Okay, well, no kidding. But if you get right up to that guardrail, you're probably going to fall.
Right.
You know, or it can't be, we're going to spend the night together, but nothing's going to happen. That can't be your guardrail, because when you hit that guardrail, you're going to go over. But I think all couples should implement these. And again, these aren't things we were perfect at, but it's things we learned. And if we could redo it, we would do this. Don't make out for a super long period of time or at all.
Yeah.
I remember Robbie in one of our SLT meetings back in high school said like how it's probably going to lead to sin if you make out for 30 minutes. And that was the first time I'd ever even heard it put like that. And I was like, well, that's true. You know, I mean, like that really is. And it's going to be hard for you to make out and not sin at all. So I would say be very careful with that one, if at all. Be careful of situations where you're alone. Like, if you guys are still living at your parents' house or you have roommates or something, don't be in the room with the door closed. I understand there's certain situations where you may be alone for a short period of time, but when you're in those moments, your guardrail should be even taller, even safer, even farther away from the cliff. I think maybe this one goes without saying, but like, we would never even change around each other. We swam with each other, so she had seen me with my shirt off and stuff, but like, even if I was changing shirt, I'd go in another room. Yeah. Don't take your clothes off. Speaking of swimsuits, like, a safe rule is don't touch a part of your body that would be covered by a swimsuit. That's not mine to touch on her, and that wasn't her. So there's other ones, but you have to think about what are your trigger points. Again, if you're not willing to admit that, it's pride. You need to be honest. All of us have trigger points. And then what times of your life are you most vulnerable? I heard this said in like a YouTube video. I couldn't even find it if I wanted to, but the video was like, how far is too far? And like I said at the beginning, I was really curious about that when I started dating because I didn't know. There is a time and place for that conversation, but so many times I think we use that question selfishly. It's like, how far is too far? But when you think about it, what you're asking yourself is, how close can I get to breaking God's heart without doing it? Ooh. Like, how close, how far away from God can I get without it being bad? How close can I get to sinning without it being bad? So don't even worry about that. Like, pursue God wholeheartedly. Walk with Jesus step by step by step. Is so many times, especially in our culture, we think God's boundaries are to keep us from a fun life. God doesn't want you to have sex, like you said. God doesn't want you to explore your sexuality because he doesn't want you to have fun. He wants you to be that stiff religious kind. But anything God's telling you not to do is to protect you. But God gave you the desire to have sex. God gave you the desire for, if you're a dude, for a girl, or vice versa. God gave you that desire, but it's to be used correctly. And when it's not, or when it's handled foolishly, like that's going to cause destruction. So take it very slow. That's not fun. That's probably not what your friends are doing, but you won't regret it. You really won't.
You won't. All right, guys. So I hope y'all enjoyed this episode. This has been awesome. I hope you really take some stuff away from this and maybe put some guardrails up in your own life and just ultimately grow closer with God. So stay tuned, stay blessed, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye.